Chapter 22 The Ritual of Chud 1. In the Lair of It, 1958. It was Bill who held them together as that great black spider raced down its web, creating a nauseous breeze that troused their hair. Stan shrank like a baby, his brown eyes bludgeoned from their sockets, his fingers harrowing his cheeks. Ben backed slowly away until his ample ass struck the wall to the left of the door. He felt cold fire burn through his pants and stepped away again, but dreamily. Surely none of this could be happening. It was simply the world's worst nightmare. He found he could not have his hands. They seemed to have big weights tied to them. Richie found his eyes drawn to that web, hanging here and there, particularly wrapped in silken strands that seemed to move as if alive were a number of rotten half-eaten bodies. He thought he recognized Eddie Corrigan near the ceiling, although both of Eddie's legs and one of his arms were gone. Beverly and Mike clutched to each other like Hansel and Gretel in the woods, watching paralyzed as the spider reached the floor and scrambled towards them, its distorted shadow racing along beside it on the wall. Bill looked around at him, a tall, skinny boy in a muddy and sewer-splattered tree shirt that had once been white jeans with cuffs, mud-caked heads. His hair lay across his forehead, and his eyes were blazing. He surveyed them, seemed to dismiss them, and turned back towards the spider, and incredibly, he began to cross the room towards it, not running, but walking fast, his elbow cocked, his forearms crowded, his hands fisted. "You killed my brother." "No, Bill," Beverly shrieked, struggling free of Mike's embrace and running towards Bill, her red hair flying out behind her. "Leave him alone," she screamed as the spider. "Don't you touch him." "Shit, Beverly," Ben thought, and then he was running too, stomach swaying back and forth in front of him, legs pumping. He was vaguely aware that Eddie Kasprak was running on his left, holding his aspirin in his good hand like a pistol, and then it was rearing up over Bill, who was unarmed. It buried Bill in its shadow, its legs pawing at the air. Ben grabbed for Beverly's shoulder. His hand slapped it, then slipped off. She turned towards him, his eyes wild, her lips drawn back from her teeth. "Help him," she screamed. "How?" Ben screamed back. He wheeled towards the spider, heard its eager mewing around, looked into its timeless, evil eyes, saw something behind the shape, something much worse than a spider, something that was all insane light. His courage faltered, but it was Bev who had asked him. Bev, and he loved her. "God damn you, leave Bill alone," he shrieked. A moment later, a hand swatted his back so hard he almost fell over. It was Richie, and although tears were running down his cheeks, Richie was grinning madly. The corners of his mouth seemed to reach almost to the lobes of his ears. Spit leaked out between his teeth. Let's get her, Haystack," Richie screamed. Chud! Her? Ben thought stupidly. Her? Did he say? Aloud. "Okay, but what is it? What's Chud?" "Frock if I know," Richie yelled, that ran towards Bill into the shadow of it. It had somehow squatted on its rear legs, its front legs pawing the air just over Bill's head, and Stan Erris, forced to approach, compelled to approach, in spite of every interest in his mind and body, saw that Bill was staring up at it, his blue eyes fixed on its inhuman orange one's eyes from which that awful corpse light spilled. Stand stop, understanding that the ritual of Chud, whenever that had begun. 2. Bill in the void. Early. Who are you, and why do you come to me? I'm Bill Deprug. You know who I am, and why I'm here. You killed my brother, and I'm here to kill you. You picked the wrong kid, bitch. I am eternal. I am the eater of worlds. Yeah, that's so? Well, you had your last meal. Sister, you have no power. Here is the power. Feel the power, brat. And then speak again. And how you come to kill the eternal. You see me. You see only that your mind will allow you. Would you see me? Come then. Come, brats, come. Fro. Not Fro. Fred. Fired like a living bullet, like the human cannibal at the Chiron Circus. It seemed to Derry each May he was picked up and heaved across the spider's chamber. It's only in my mind, he screamed at himself. My body's still standing right there, eye to eye with it. Be brave. It's only a mind trick. Be brave. Be true. Stand. Frusses, roaring forward, slamming into a back and dripping tunnel lined with decaying, crumbling tiles that were 50 years old. 100, 1,000, 1,000,000 billion. Who knew? Rushing in deadly silence past interstrict. Some lit by that twisting green, yellow. Some by glowing balloons, full of ghastly white skull light. Others dead. Black wit he was thrown at a speed of 1,000 miles an hour past piles of bones. Some humans, some not. Speeding like a rocket-powered dart in a wild tunnel, now angling upward, but not toward light, but towards dark, some titanic dark. His fists and exploded outward into utter blackness. The blackness was everything. The blackness was the cosmos and the universe, and the floor of the blackness was hard. It was like polished ebonite, and he was skidding along on his chest and belly and thighs like a weight on a scuffle board. He was on the ballroom floor of Infinity, and Infinity was back against the post. Stop that, why do you say? That won't help you, stupid boy. And he insists he sees the ghost. He thrusts his fist against the post and still insists he sees the ghost. Stop it, I demand you, I command you that you stop it. Don't like that, do you? And thinking, if I could only say it out loud, say it without stuttering, I could break this illusion. This is no illusion, you foolish boy. This is eternity, my eternity, and you are lost in it, lost forever, never to find your way back. You are eternal now, and confined to wander in the back after you meet me face to face. That is. But there was something else there. Bill sensed it, felt it in a crazy way, smelled it, some large presence ahead in the dark, a shape. He felt not fear, but a sense of overmastering awe. Here was a power which dwarfed its power, and Bill, and only time to think incorrectly. Please, whatever you are, remember that I am very small. He rushed towards it, and small it was a great turtle, its shell planted with many blazing colors, its ancient reptile and head slowly poked out of its shell, and Bill thought he felt a vague, competent surprise from the thing that had cast him out here. The eyes of the turtle were kind. Bill thought it must have been the oldest thing anyone could imagine, older by far than it, which had claimed to be eternal. Why are you? I'm the turtle, son. I made the universe, but please don't blame me for it. I had a belly ache. Help me, please help me. I take no stand in these masters. My brother has his own place in the microverse, and energy is internal, as even a child, such as yourself, must understand. He was flying past the turtle now, and even at his tremendous skid and speed, the turtle's plated side seemed to go on and on to his right. He thought dimly of riding in a train and passing one going in the other direction, a train that was so long it seemed eventually to stand still or even move backward. He could still hear it yammering and buzzing, its voice high and angry, not human, full of mad hate. But when the turtle spoke, its voice was blanked out utterly. The turtle spoke in Bill's head, and Bill understood somehow that there was yet another, and that final utter dwelt in a void beyond this one. This final other was perhaps the creator of the turtle, which only watched, and it which only ate. This other was a force beyond the universe, a power beyond all other power. The offer of all there was. Suddenly, he thought he understood. It meant to thrust him through some wall at the end of the universe and into some echo, some other place. What that old turtle called the microverse, where it really lived, where it existed as a titanic glowing core, which might be no more than the smallest note in the other's mind. He would see it naked, a thing of unshaped, destroying light, and there he would either be mercifully inhabitant or live forever, insane and yet conscious, inside its homomaniacal, endless, formless, hungry being. Please help me. For the others, you must help your son. But how? Please tell me. How? How? He had reached the turtle's heavily scarred back legs now. There was time enough to observe its titanic, yet agent flesh, time to be stuck with the other, with the wonder of its heavy toenails. They were an odd bluish yellow color, and he could see galaxies swimming in each other. Please, you are God. I sense and believe that you are good, and I am begging you, won't you please help me? You already know there is only a child and your friends. Please, oh please, son, you've got to thrust your fist against the post and still insist you see the ghost. That's all I can tell you. Once you get into Kalamasalik shit like this, you got to throw away the instructions manual. He realized the voice of the turtle was fading. He was beyond it now, bulletin into a darkness that was deeper than deeper. The turtle's voice was being overmastered by the gleeful, glibbering voice of the thing that had thrust him out and into his black void. The voice of the spider of it. How do you like it out here, little friend? Do you like it? Do you love it? Do you give it 98 points because it was as good beat and you can dance to it? Can you catch it in your tossinals and heave it left and right? Did you enjoy meeting my friend the turtle? I thought that stupid old fuck died years ago. And for all the good he could do you, he might as well have. Did you think he could help you? No. He thrust. No. Stop blabbling. The time is short. Let us talk while we still can. Tell me about yourself, little friend. Tell me, do you love all the cold dark out here? Are you enjoying your grand tour of the nothingness that lies outside? Wait until you break through, little friend. Wait until you break through to where I am. Wait for that. Wait for the deadlights. You'll look and you'll go mad, but you'll live and live and live inside them, inside me. It screamed noxious laughter, and Bill became aware that its voice was beginning both to fade and to swell, as if he was similar, drawn out of its range and hurtling into it. Wasn't that just what was happening? Yeah, he thought. It was because while the voice were in perfect syncs, the one he was now rushing towards was totally alien speaking syllables. No human tongue or throat could reproduce. That's the voice of the deadlights, he thought. The time is short. Let us talk while we still can. Its human voice faded away to Bangor radio station. Faded when you were in the car and traveling south. Bright flare and terror filled him. He would shortly be beyond same conditioning with it. And some part of him understood that. For all its laughters, for all its alien glee, that was what it wanted it, not just to send him out to whatever it really was, but to beak their mental commission. If that ceased, he would be utterly destroyed. To pass beyond commission was to pass beyond salvation. He understood that much from the way his parents had behaved towards him after George had died. It was the only lesson their refrigerator coldness had to teach him, leaving it and approaching it. But the leaving was somehow more important if it wanted to eat little kids out there or suck them in or whenever it did. Why hadn't it sent him all out here? Why just that him? Because it had to rid its spider self of him. That was why somehow the spider the it which it called the delights, were linked whenever lived out here in the black might be inevitable when it was here and nowhere else. But it was almost on earth, under Derry, in a form that was physical. However reimpulse it might be in Derry, it was physical, and what physical could be killed. Bill skidded through the dark, his speed still increasing. Why do I sense so much of its talk? It is nothing but a bluff, a big struck and jive. Why could that be? How can that be? He understood how maybe, just maybe, there is only Chud, the turtle had said, and suppose this was it. Suppose they had bitten deep into each other's tongues, not physically, but mentally, spiritually, and suppose that if it could throw Bill far enough into the void, far enough forward its internal discovering itself, the ritual would be over. It would have ripped him free, killed him, and won everything, all at the same time. You're doing good, son, but very shortly it's going to be too late. It's scared of me, scared of all of us. He was skinning, and there was a wall up ahead. He sensed it in the dark. The wall at the edge of the communion, and beyond it the utter shape, the dead lights. Don't talk to me, son. And don't talk to yourself. It's tearing you loose. Bit in if you care, if you dare, if you can be brave, if you can stand. Bite it, son. Bill bitten. Not with his teeth, but with his teeth in his mind. Dropping his voice a full register, making it one, his own, making it in fact his father's voice, although Bill would go to his grave not knowing this. Some secrets are never known, and it's probably better so. Drawing in a great breath, he cried. He thrust his fists against the posts, and still insists he sees the ghost. The ghost has now let me go. He felt it scream in his mind, a scream of frustration, penitent rage, but it was also a scream of fear and pain. It was not used to having its own way. Such a thing had never happened to it, and until the most recent moments of its success, it had not suspected such a thing could. Bill felt it rightin', riffing at him, not pulling but pushing, trying to get him away. Thrust his fist against the post. I said, "Stop it! Bring me back! You must! I command it! I demand it!" It screamed again, its pain more intense now, perhaps partly because while it had spent its long inflicting pain feeding on it, it had never experienced. It was a part of itself. Still, it tried to push him, to get rid of him, blindly and stubbornly, insistent, unwitting, as it had always won before. It pushed, but Bill sensed that his outward speed had slowed. In a grasping image came into his mind, its tongue covered with that living spindle, extended like a thick rubber band, cracking, bleeding. He saw himself clinging to the ripe of that tongue by his teeth, ripping through it a little at a time. His face breathed in a convulsive ichor that was its blood drawn in its dead stretch, yet still was holding on somehow, while it struggled in its blind pain and towering rage, not and to let its tongue snap back. Chud, this Chud, stand, be brave, be true, stand for your brother, your friends, believe in all the things you have believed in. Believe that it told the policeman you're lost. He'll see that you get home safely, that there is a tooth fairy who lived in a huge emerald castle, that Santa Claus below the North Pole making toys with his trove of elves, and that Captain Midnight could be real. Yes, could be in spite of Calvin and Casey Clark's big brother Collerton, saying that was all a lot of baby stuff. Believe that your mother and father will love you again, that courage is possible, and words will come smoothly every time. No more losers, no more cowering in a hole in the ground and calling in a clubhouse. No more crying in Georgie's room because you couldn't save him and didn't know. Believe in yourself. Believe in the heat of that desire. And suddenly began to laugh in the darkness, not in hysterics, but in utter delighted amazement. "Oh shit, I believe in all of those things," he shouted, and it was true. Even at 11, he had observed that things tunnel out right a ridiculous amount of the time. Light flared around him. He raised his arm out and above his head. He turned his face up, and suddenly he felt power rush through him. He heard it scream, and suddenly he was being drawn back the way he had come, still holding that image of his teeth planted deep in the strange meat of its tongue, his teeth locked together like grim old death. He flew through the dark, legs trailing behind him, the tips of his mud-crusted sneaker laces flying like pennants, the wind of this empty place blowing in his ears. He was pulled past the turtle and saw that its head had withdrawn into its shell. His voice emerged hollowed and distorted, as if the shell it lived in were a well and turnedness deep. "Not bad, son, but I'd finish now. Don't let it get away. Energy has a way of disparaging, you know. What can be done when you're 11 can never be done again." The one of the turtle faded. There was only the rushing dark, and then the mouth of a cyclopean tunnel, smells of ages and decay, cobwebs brushing at his face like rotten skin of silk in a haunted house, moldering tiles, blurring by intersections, all dark now, the moon balloons, all gone, and it was screaming, "Let me go, I'll leave, never come back, let me go, it hurts, hurt." Thrust his fist, Bill screamed, nearly delirious now. He could see light ahead, but it was fading, guttering like great candles, which had at last buried low, and for a moment he saw himself and the other holding hands in a line, Eddie on one side of him and Richie on the other. He saw his own body sagging, his head rolled back on his neck, staring up at the spider, which twisted and whirled like a dervish, its coarse, spiny legs beating at the floor, poison dripping from its stinger. It was screaming in its death agony. So Bill honestly believed then he was slamming back into his body with all the impact of a line drive slamming into a baseball glove, the force of it tearing his hands loose from Richie's and Eddie's, driving him to his knees and skidding him across the floor to the edge of the web. He reached out for one of the stands without thinking, and his hand immediately were numbed as if it had been ejected with a hypno full of Novocaine. Its stand itself was as faint as a telephone pole guy wire. "Don't touch that," Ben yelled, and Bill yanked his hand away in one quick jerk, leaving a new raw place across his palm just below the fingers. It filled with blood, and he staggered to his feet, eyes on the spider. It was scrambling away from them, making its way into the grow and into the dimness at the back of the chamber. As the light failed, it left puddles and pools of black blood behind as it went. Somehow there, confrontation had ruptured its insides in a dozen, maybe 100 places. Bill the web, Mike screamed, looked out. He stepped backward, craning his neck as strands of its web came floating down, striking the stone flagged floor on either side of him like the bodies of meaty white snakes. They immediately began to lose shape, to flow into the cracks between the stones. The web was falling apart, coming loose from its many moorings. One of the bodies, wrapped up like a fly, came plunging down to strike the floor with a sickened, rotten ground sound. "The spider!" Bill yelled. "Where is it?" He could still hear it in his head, mewing and crying out in its pain, and understood dimly that it had gone into the same tunnel it had thrown Bill into. But had it gone in there to flee back to the place where it had meant to send Bill, or to hide until they were gone, to die or escape? "Christ, the lights!" Richie shouted. "The lights are going out." "What happened, Bill? Where did you go? We thought you were dead." In some confused part of his mind, Bill knew that wasn't true. If they had really thought him dead, they would run scattering, and it would have picked them off easily, one by one. Or perhaps it would be truer to say that they had thought him dead, but believed him alive. "We have to make sure. If it's dying or gone back, or when it came back, come where the rest of it is, that's fine. But what if it's just hurt? What if it can get better? What?" Stan shrinked out, cut across his thoughts like broken glass. In the fading light, Bill saw that one of the strands of webbing had come down of Stan's shoulder. Before Bill could reach him, Mike had thrown himself at the smaller body in a flying tackle. He drove Stan away, and the piece webbing snapped back, taking Stan's polo shirt with it. "Get back," Ben yelled at them. "Get away from him. It's all coming down." He seized Beverly's hand and pulled her back towards the child-seized door, while the Stan struggled to his feet, looked dazedly around, and then grabbed Eddie. The two of them stared towards Ben and Beverly, held each other, looking like phantom in the fading lights. Overhead, the spiderweb was drooping colossally on itself, loosened its fearful symbiote bodies swirled lazily in the air like nightmarish plumb bobs. Cross standards fell in like the rotten rugs of some strange complex of ladder. Several stands in the stone flagging hissed like cats, like their shape, began to run. Mike Hanlon woved his way through them as he would later weaved his way through the opposite lines of nearly a dozen high school football teams. Head down, ducking and dodging, Richie joined him. Incredibly, Richie was laughing, although his hair was standing him straight up on his head like the quills of a porcupine. The light drew dimmer, the photonapacy that had coiled on the walls now, dying away. Bill, Mike shouted, "Come on, get the frog out of here." What? What if it's not dead? Bill screamed back. We have to go after it, Mike. To make sure, a snarl of weapons stagged outward like a parachute and then fell with a nasty ripping sound that was like skin beginning to pull apart. Mike grabbed Bill's arm and pulled him, stumbling out of the way. "It's dead," Eddie cried, joining him, his eyes firmly lamps. His breathing, a chilling winter whistle in his throat. Fallen strands of webby had sizzled complex scars into the plaster of Paris of its cast. "I heard it. It was dying. You don't sound like that if you're on your way to Sock Hop. It was dying, I'm sure of it." Richie's hands groped out of darkness, seized Bill and pulled him into a rough embrace. He began to pound Bill's back incessantly. "I heard it too. It was dying, Big Bill. It was dying. And you're not stuttering. Not at all. How did you do it? How in the hell?" Bill's brain was whirling, exhaustion tugged at him with thick and clumsy hands. He could not remember ever feeling this tired, but in his mind he heard drawling, almost wearing, the voice of the turtle. "I'd finish it now. Don't let it get away. What can be done when you're 11 can often never be done it." But he had never, to be sure. The shadows were joining hands, and now the darkness was almost completely. But before the light failed utterly, he thought he saw the same hellish doubt on Beverly's face and in Stan's eyes, and still as the last of the light gave away, they could hear the tremendous whisper, stutter, thump of its unspeakable web falling to pieces. Free. Bill in the void. Late. I guess so. "Well, here you are again, little buddy. But what's happened to your hair? You're just as bald as a cue ball. Sad. What sad short lives humans live. Each other like a short pamphlet written by an idiot. Tut-tut and all that. I'm still Bill Debroke. You killed my brother and you killed Stan, the man. You tried to kill Mike, and I'm going to tell you something. This time I'm not going to stop until the job's done." The turtle was stupid, too stupid to lie. He told the truth. "Little buddy, the time only comes around once. You heard me. You surprised me. Never again. I am the one who called you back. You called all right, but you weren't the only one. Your friend the turtle. He died a few years ago. The old idiot puked inside his shell and choked to death on a galaxy or two. Very sad, don't you think? But also quite bizarre. Deserves a place in Riplets, believed it or not. That's what I think happened right around the same time you had writer's block. You must have felt him go, little buddy. I don't believe that either. Oh, you'll believe. You'll see this time, little buddy. I intend you to see everything, including the deadlights." He sensed its voice rising, buzzing and racking. At last, he sensed the full extent of its fury, and he was terrified. He reached for the tongue of its mind, the considering, trying to desperately the recapture the full extent of that child, the Burleaf, understanding at the same time that there was a deadly truth in what it had said. Last time it had been unprepared. This time, well, even if it had not been the only one to call them, it sure had been waiting. But still, he felt his own fury clean singing as his eyes fixed on its eyes. He sensed its old scar, sensed that it had truly been hurt, and that it was still hurt. And as it threw him as if he felt his mind squatted out of his body. He concerted all of his being on seizing its tongue and missed his grip. 4. Richie. The other 4 watched paralyzed. It was an exact reply of what had happened before. At first, the spider would seem about to seize Bill and gobbled him up, grew suddenly still. Bill's eyes locked with its ruby ones. There was a sense of contact, a contact just beyond their ability to divine, but they felt the struggle, the clash of wills. Then Richie glanced up into the new web and saw the first difference. There were bodies there, some half-eaten and half-rotten, and that was the same. But high up in the one corner was another body, and Richie was sure this one was still fresh, possibly even still alive. Beverly had not looked up. Her eyes were fixed on Bill and the spider. But even in his terror, Richie saw the resemblance between Beverly and the woman in the web. Her hair was long and red. Her eyes were open but glassy, unmoving. A line of spittle had run from the left corner of her mouth down to her chain. She had been attached to one of the web's main cables by a gossamer harness that went around her waist and under both arms, so that she lowed forward, and in a half bow, arms and legs dangling desolate, her feet were bare. Richie saw another body crumpled at the foot of her web, a man he had never seen before, and yet his mind readjusted in almost suffocation's resemblance to the late unlimited Henry Bowers. Blood had run from both of the stranger's eyes, caked in a foam around his mouth and on his chin. Nan Beverly was screaming, "Something's wrong. Something's gone wrong. Do something, for Christ's sake. Won't somebody do something?" Richie's gaze snapped back to Bill, and the spider and he sensed heard monstrous laughter. Bill's face was stretching in some subtle way. His skin had gone parchment, swallow as shining as the skin of a very old person. His eyes were rolled up to the whites. "Oh, Bill, where are you?" As Richie watched, blood suddenly burst from Bill's nose in a foam. His mouth was written, trying to scream, and now the spider was advancing on him. It was turning, presenting its stinger. It means to kill him, kill his body, anyway, while his mind is somewhere else. It means to shut him out forever. It's winning. "Bill, where are you? For Christ's sake, where are you?" And somewhere faintly, from some unimaginable distance, he heard Bill scream. And the words, although meaningless, were crystal clear and full of sickness. "The turtle is dead. Oh, God, the turtle is really dead." Despair. Bev shrinked again and put her hands to her ears as if to shut out that fading voice. The spider's stinger rose and Richie bolted at it, a grin spreading up towards his ears, and he called out in the best Irish cop's voice, Here, me foine girl. Just what in the hell do you think we're doing? Be laid that guff before I snatch you petty skirts and snap your smithy riddles." The spider stopped laughing, and Richie felt a rising bull howl of anger and pain inside its head. "Heard it," he thought trumpetly. "Heard it. How about heard it? And guess what? I've got its tongue. I think Bill missed it somehow, but while it was distracted, I got..." Then, screaming at him, its cries a hive of furious bees in his head, Richie was whacked out of himself and into the darkness, dimly aware that it was trying to shake him loose. It was doing a pretty good job, too. Terror washed through him, and then was replaced by a sense of cosmic absurdity. He remembered Beverly with his Dukan yo-yo, showing him how to make it sleep, walk the dog, go around the world, and how here he was, Richie the human yo-yo, and its tongue was the string. Here he was, and this wasn't called walking the dog, but maybe walking the spider. If that wasn't funny, what was? Richie laughed. It wasn't polite to laugh with your mouth full of course, but he doubted if anybody out there read Miss Manners. That got him laughing, and he bit in harder. The spider screamed and shook them furiously, howling its anger at being surprised again. Had believed only the writer would challenge it, and now this man who was laughing like a crazy boy who had seized it when it was leaped prepared. Richie felt himself slipping. Holy skimmin', Shorten. We's going out here together, or I ain't going to sell you no tickets and lottery after all. And everyone is a big winner. I swear on my mama's name. He felt his teeth catch again, more firmly this time, and there was a fainted sort of pain as it drove its fangs into his dark tongue. Boy, it was still pretty funny, though, even in the dark being hurled after. Bill was only the tongue of this unspeakable monster left to connect him to his own world, even with the pain of its poisonous fangs suffusing his mind like a red fog. It was pretty goddamned funny. Check it out, folks. You believed it. A disc jockey can fly. He was flying all right. Richie was in greater darkness than he had ever known, than he had ever suspected might exist, traveling at what felt like the speed of light, of being shaken as a terrier shakes a rat. He sensed that there was something up ahead, some titanic corpse, the turtle he had heard. Bill Lamington in his fading voice. Must be. It was only a shell, a dead husk. Then he was past, rushing on into the darkness. Who's steaming now, he thought, and he felt that wild urge to cackle again. Bill, can you hear me? He's gone. He's in the deadlights. Let me go. Richie? An incredibly distant, incredibly far out in the back. Bill, here I am. Catch hold. For God's sake, catch hold. He's dead. You're all dead. You're too old. Don't you remember that? Now let me go. Hey, bitch, you're never too old to rock and roll. Let me go. Take me to him, and maybe I will. Richie? Closer. He was closer now. Thank God. Here I come, Big Bill. Richie to the rescue. Gonna save your old crack ass. Own you one from that day on Neilbolt Street, remember? Let me go! It was hurting badly now, and Richie understood how completely he had caught it by surprise. He had believed it had only Bill to deal with. Well, good's enough. Richie didn't care about killing it right now. He was no longer it could be killed, but Bill could be killed, and Richie sensed that Bill's time was now very, very short. Bill was closing on some large nasty surprise out here, something best not thought about. Richie, no, go back. It's the edge of everything up here. The dead lights sounds like what you turn on when you drive in your hearse at midnight, Semhor, and where it is you, honey chili. Smile so I could see where you is. And suddenly Bill was there, skidding along on the left, right. There was no direction here. One side or the other, and beyond him, coming up fast, which he could see / sense. Something that finally dried up his laughter. It was a barrier, something of a strange, non-grammatical shape that his mind could not grasp. Instead, his mind translated it as it the best could, as it could not grasp. Instead, his mind translated as best it could, as it had translate the shape of it into a spider, allowing Richie to think of a colossal gray, well-made colossal wooden shakes. These stakes went forever and forever down like the bars of a cage, and from between them shone a great blind light. It glared and moved, smiled and snarled. The light was alive. Dead lights. More than alive. It was a full of force, magnificent gravity, perhaps something else. Richie felt himself lifted and dropped, swirled and pulled as if he were shooting a fast throat of rapids. In an inner tube, he could feel the light moving eagerly over his face, and the light was thinking, This is it, the rest of it. Let me go, you promised to let me go. I know, but sometimes, honey chili, I lied. My mama, she beat me for it. But my daddy, he done just about give up. He sensed Bill tumbling and falling towards one of the gaps in the wall, sensed evil fingers of light reaching for him, and with a final despairing effort, he reached for his friend. Bill, your hand. Give me your hand. Your hand. God damn it, your hand. Bill's hand shot out, the fingers opening and closing that living, fire-crawling, twisted over Audryn's wedding ring and Rutnick, Mortian patterns, wheels, crescents, stars, Sawakatons, linked circles that grew into rolling chains. Bill's face was overlaid with the same light, make him look tattooed. Richie stretched out as far as he could, hearing it scream and yammer. I missed him. Oh, dear God, I missed. He's going to shoot through. Then Bill's fingers closed over Richie's, and Richie clenched his hand into a fist. Bill's leg flew through one of the gaps in the frozen wood, and for one mad moment, Richie realized he could see all the bones and veins and capillaries inside them, as if Bill had shot halfway into the maw of the world's strongest X-ray machine. Richie felt the muscles in his arms stretch like taffy, felt the ball and socket joint in his shoulder creak and groan in protest as the foot-pounds of pressure built up. He summoned all of his force and shouted, pull us back, or I'll kill you. I'll voice you to death." The spider screeched again, and Richie suddenly felt a great snap and wildish curl through his body. His arms was a white-hot bar of agony. His grip on Bill's hand began to slip. "Hold on, Bill. I got you, Richie. I got you." "You better," Richie thought grimly, "because I think you could walk 10 billion miles out of here and never find a fucking pay toilet." They whistled back. That crazy light faded, become a series of brilliant pinpoints that finally winked out. They drove through the darkness like torpedoes, Richie gripping its tongue with his teeth and Bill's wrist with one aching hand. There was the turtle. There and gone in a single eye blink. Richie sensed them drawing closer to whatever passed for the real world. Although he believed he would never think of it as exactly real again, he would see it as a clever conveyance scene underlaid with a crisscrossing of support cables like the strands of a spider web. "But we're going to be all right," he thought. "We're going to get back." The buffeting began, then the whipping, slamming side to side, feeling as it tried one final time to shake them off and leave them outside. And Richie felt his grip slipping. He heard its grundle roar of trumpet and connected his being on Holden, but he continued to slip. He bit down facetiously, but its tongue seemed to be losing substance. In reality, it seemed to be becoming gossamer. "Help!" Richie screamed. "I'm losing it! Help! Somebody help us!" 5. Eddie. Eddie was half aware of what was happening. He felt it somehow, saw it somehow, but as if through a gauzy curtain, somewhere Bill and Richie were struggling to come back. Their bodies were here, but the rest of them, the real of them, was far away. He had seen the spider turn to impale Bill with its stinger, and then Richie had run forward, yelling at it in that ridiculous Irish cop's voice he used to use. Only Richie must have improved his act a hell of a lot over the years, because this voice sounded eerily like Mr. Nell from the old days. The spider had turned towards Richie, and Eddie had seen its unspeakable red eyes bulge in their sockets. Richie yelled again, this time in his Pacho Vanilla voice, and Eddie had felt the spider scream in pain. Ben yelled hoarsely as a split appeared in its hide along the line of one of its scars from the last time. A stream of inhor, black as crude oil, sprayed out. Richie had started to say something else, and his voice had begun to diminish like the fade at the end of a pop song. His head had rolled back on his neck, his eyes fixed on its eyes. The spider grew quiet again. Time passed. Eddie had no idea just how much. Richie and the spider stared at each other. Eddie sensed the connection between them, felt a swirl of talk and emotion somewhere far away. He could make out nothing exactly, but sensed the tones of things and colors and hues. Bill laid slumped on the floor, nose and ears bleeding and twitching slightly, his long face pale, his eyes closed. The spider was now bleeding in 4 or 5 places, badly hurt. Again, badly hurt, but still dangerously vital. And Eddie thought, why are we just standing around here? We could hurt it while it's occupied with Richie. Why doesn't somebody move, for Christ's sake? He sensed a wild trumpeting, and that feeling was clearly sharper, closer, than coming back. He wanted to shout, but his mouth was too dry, his throat too tight. They're coming back. Then Richie's head began to turn slowly from side to side. His body seemed to ripple inside his clothes. His glasses hung on the end of his nose. For a moment, then fell off and shattered on the stone floor. The spider stirred its spinny legs, making a dry clittering on the floor. Eddie heard it cry out in terrible trumpeting, and a moment later, Richie's voice burst clearly into his mind. "Help! I'm losing it! Somebody help me!" Eddie ran forward them, yanking his aspartame from his pocket with his good hand, his lips drawn back in a grimace, his breath whistling painfully in and out of a throat that now felt the size of a pinhole. Crazily, his mother's face danced before him, and she was crying. "Don't go near that thing, Eddie. Don't go near it. Things like that give you cancer." "Shut up, Ma," Eddie screamed in a high, shrinky voice. All the voice he had left. The spider's head turned towards the sound, its eyes momentarily leaving Richie's. "Here," Eddie howled in his fading voice. "Here, have some of this." He leaped at it, triggering the aspartame at the same time, and for an instant, all his childhood believed in the medicine came back to him. The childhood medicine that could solve everything, that could make him feel better when the bigger boys roughed him up, or when he was knocked over in a rush to get through the doors, when school let out, or when he had sit on the edge of the Tracker Brothers' vacant lot of the game because his mother wouldn't allow him to play baseball. It was good medicine, strong medicine, as he leaped into the spider's face, smelling its foul yellow stench, feeling himself overwhelmed by its single-minded fury and determination to wipe them all out. He triggered the aspartame into one of its ruby eyes. He heard it scream, no rage this time, only pain, a horrid scream in agony. He saw the mist of droplets settle on that blood-red bludge, saw the droplets turn white where they landed, saw them sink in as a splash of carbonic acid would sink in. He saw its huge eyes begin to flatten out like a bloody egg yolk and run in a ghastly stream of living blood and ichor and maggoty pus. Come home now, Bill," he screamed with the last of his voice, and then he struck it, its nauseous heat baking into him. He felt a terrible wet warmth and realized that his good arms had slipped into the spider's mouth. He triggered the aspartame again, shouting the stuff right down its throat, this time right down its rotten, evil, stinking gullet, and there was sudden flashing pain, as clean as the drop of a heavy knife, as its jaw closed and ripped his arm off at the shoulder. Eddie fell to the floor, the rag stump of his arm, spraying blood, faintly aware that Bill was getting shakily to his feet, that Richie was weaving and stumbling toward him like a drunk at the end of a long, hard night. Ed's far away, unimportant. He could feel everything running out of him, along with his life's blood, all the rage, all the pain, all the fear, all the confusion and hurt. He supposed he was dying, but he felt, God, he felt so lurid, so clear, like a window pane, which has been washed clean, and now lets in all the glorious frightening light of some unexpected dawn in the light. Oh God, that perfect rational light that clears the horizon, somewhere in the word, every second. Ed's, oh my God, Bill, Ben, somehow, he lost his arm. He's looked up at Beverly and saw she was crying, the tears concentrating down her dirty cheeks. As she got an arm under him, he became aware that she had taken off her blouse and was trying to stomach the flow of blood she was screaming for help. Then he looked at Richie and licked his lips, fading black, becoming clearer and clearer, emptying out all of the impertinent following out of him so he could become clear, so that the light could flow through, and he had come enough. He could have Proust on this. He could have Seminus. Not bad. He would begin. This is not bad at all. But there was nothing else he had to say first. Richie, he whispered. What? Richie was down on his hands and knees, staring at him desperately. Don't call me, Ed, he said and smiled. He raised his left hand slowly and touched Richie's cheek. Richie was crying. You know, Eddie closed his eyes, thinking how to finish, and while he was still thinking it over, he died. 6. Dairy. 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. By 7 a.m., the wind speed in Derry had picked up to about 37 miles an hour, with gusts up to 45. Harry Brooks, a National Weather Service forecaster based at Bangor International Airport, made an alarmed call to NWS headquarters in Augusta. The winds, he said, were coming out of the west and blowing in the queer symmetrical pattern he had never seen before, but it looked to him more and more like some weird species of pocket hurricane, one that was limited almost exclusively to Derry Township at 7:10. The Bangor radio stations broadcast the first several weather warnings. The explosion of the power transformer at Tracker Brothers had killed the power all over Derry on the Keswick Street side of the Barriers at 7:17. A Horrier, Old Maple, on the Old Cape side of the Barriers, fell with a traffic rending crash, flattened a Night Owl store on the corner of Merritt Street. A Cape Avenue, an elderly pattern named Raymond Fogarty was killed by a top-lit beer cooler. This was the same Raymond Fogarty who, as the minister of the First Methodist Church of Derry, had presided over the burial rites of George Deborah in October of 1957. The Maple also pulled down enough power lines to knock out the power in both of the Old Cape and somewhat more fashionable Sherburne woods developed beyond it. The clock in the steeple of the Grace Baptist Church had chimed neither 6 nor 7 at 7:20, 3 minutes after the Maple fell in the Old Cape, and in about an hour and 15 minutes after every toilet and Dawsmic drain over there had suddenly reversed itself. The clock in the tower chimed 13 times. A minute later, a blue-white stroke of lightning struck on of the steeple. Hedder Limby, the minister's wife, happened to be looking out the window of the parsonage kitchen at the time, and she said that the steeple exploded like someone loaded it up with dynamite. Whitewashed boards, chunks of beams, and clockwork from Switzerland showered down on the street. The rag remains, the steeple burned briefly, and then guttered out in the rain, which was now a tropical downpout. The streets leaded downhill, and the downtown shop and arena foamed and ran. The process of the canal under Main Street had become a steady shaken thunder that made people look at each other uneasily at 7:25, with the titanic crash of the Grace Baptist steeple still reverberating all over Derry. The janitor who came into Wally Spa every morning except Sunday to swamp the place out saw something which sent him screaming into the street. This fellow, who had been an alcoholic ever since his first semester at the University of Maine Losties 11 years ago, was paid a pittance for his service. This his real pay. It was understood what his absolute freedom to finish up anything left in the beer kegs under the bar from the night before. Richie Tozier might or might not have remembered him. He was Vincent Cosero Talondian, better known to his fifth grade comparses as Boogers Taliando, as he was mopping up on that apocalyptic morning in Derry, working his way gradually closer and closer to the Severn arena. He saw all 7 of the beer tabs, 3 bud, 2 narrow-stick on 1 sulchins, no more firmly to the blurry patterns of Wally's as slits, and 1 milliliter light nod forward as if pulled by 7 invisible hands. Beer ran from them in streams of gold-white foam. Vince started forward, thinking not of ghosts or phantoms, but of his mornings divided going down the drain. Then he skidded to a stop, eyes widened and wailing. Horrified scream rose in the empty beer-smelling cave that was Wally's Spa. Beer had given way to Adderall, stream of bloods. It swirled in the Charmerdom drains, overflowed, and ran down the side of the bars in little streamlets. Now hair and chunks of flesh began to spurl out of the beer taps. Boogers, Taliando watched this, transfixed, not even able to summon enough strength to scream again. Then there was a thunder toneless blast as one of the beer kegs under the counter exploded. All of the cupboard doors under the bar swung wide. Greenish smoke, like the aftermath of the magician's trick, began to drift out of them. Boogers had seen enough screaming. He filed into the streets, which was now a swallow canal. He fell on his butt, got up and threw a terrified glance back over his shoulder. One of the bar's windows blew out with a loud shooting gallery sound. Wickers of broken glass whistled all around Vincent's head. A moment later, the other window exploded. Once again, he was miraculously untouched, but he decided on the spur of the moment that the time had come to see his sister up Eastport. He started off at once, and his journey to the Derry town limits and beyond would make a saga in itself, but suffice it to say that he did eventually get out of town. Others were not so lucky. A novelist Nell, who had turned 77 not long since, was sitting with his wife in the parlor of their home on Strapham Street, watching the storm-pound Derry at 1732. He suffered a fatal stroke. His wife told her brother a week later that a novelist dropped his coffee cup on the rug, sat bolt upright, his eyes wide and staring, and screamed, Here, me phone girl, just what in the hell do you think you're doing? Belayed that guff before I snatch your purskins." Then he fell out of his chair, smashing his coffee cup under him. Murr and Nell, who knew well how bad this ticker had been for the last 3 years, understood immediately that all was over with him. And after loosening his collar, she had run for the telephone to call Father McDowell. But the phone was out of order. A funny noise like a police siren was all it would make. And so, although she knew it was probably a blasphemy, she would have to answer for the St. Peter. She had attempted to give him the last rites himself. She felt convicted. She told her brother that God would understood even if St. Peter didn't, anonymously had been a good husband and a good man. And if he drank too much, that was only the Irish in him coming out. At 7:49, a series of explosions shook the Derry Mall, which stood on the site of the defunct Kitchener Ironworks. No one was killed. The mall didn't open until 10, and the 5-man Jarnell squad hadn't been due to arrive until 8. And on such a morning, at this very few of them would have shown up anyway. A team of investigators later dismissed the idea of sabotage. They suggested rather vaguely that the explosions had probably been caused by water which had seeped into the mall's electrical system. Whenever the reason, no one was going to go shopping at the Derry Mall for a long time. One explosion totally wiped out Zale's jewelry store. Diamond rings, ID bracelets, strings of pearls, trays of wedding rings, and Cinco digital watches flew everywhere in a hail of bright, sparkly trinkets. A music box flew the ledge of the East Corridor and landed in the fountain outside of the J.C. Penney's, where it briefly played a bubbly renditions of the theme from Love Story before shutting down. The same blast tore a hole through the Baskin-Robbins next door, turning the 31 flavors into ice cream soup that ran away along the floor in cloudy tunnels. The blast, which tore through Sears, lifted off a chunk off the roof, and the rising wind sailed it away like a kite. It came down 1,000 yards away, slicing cleanly through the silo of a farmer named Burritt Kilgallen. Kilgallen's 16-year-old son rushed out with his mother Kodak and took a picture. The National Enquirer brought it for $60, which the boy used to buy 2 new tires for his Yamba motorcycle. A third explosion right through hit or miss, sending flaming skirts, jeans, and underwear out into the flood parking lot, and a final explosion tore open the mall branch of the Dairy Farms Trust. Like a rotten back of box of crackers, and chunk of the bank's roof was also torn off. Burglar alarms went off with a bray that would not be silenced until the security system's independent wiring hooked up was shorted out 4 hours later. Loan contracts, banking instruments, deposits, slips, cash drawers, kits, and money manger forms were lifted into the sky and blown away by the rising wind, and money tens and twenties mostly, with a generous helping of fives, and a soup con of fifties and hundreds, better than $75,000 blew away, according to the bank's officers. Later, after a mass shake-up in the bank's exclusive destructives, and an FSLIC bailed out. Some would admit strictly off the record, of course, that it had been more like 200,000. A woman in Harvey Village named Rebecca Paulson found a $50 bill fluttering from her back door, welcome at 220s in her birdhouse, and 100 plaster against an oak tree in her backyard. She and her husband used the money to make an extra 2 payments on their ball barter in Skidadoo. Dr. Hale, a retired doctor who had lived on West Broadway for nearly 50 years, was killed at 8 a.m. Dr. Hale liked to boast that he had taken the same 2-mile walk from his West Broadway home and around Dairy Park and the elementary school for the last 25 for those 50 years. Northland stopped him, not rain and sleet, hail, Halloween northeasterns, or sub-zero cold. He set out on the morning of May 31st in spite of his housekeeper's worried fussing, his exit line from the world spoken back over his shoulder as he went through the front door. The pulling his hat firmly down to his ears was, "Don't be so goddamn silly, Hilda. This is nothing but a cap full of rain. You should have seen it in 57. That was a storm." As Dr. Hale turned back onto West Broadway, a manhole cover in front of the Mueller place suddenly lifted off like the payload of a Redstone rocket and decapitated the good doctor so quickly and neatly that he walked on another 3 steps before collapsing dead on the sidewalk, and the wind continued to rise. 7 under the city, 4:15 p.m. Eddie led them through the darkened tunnels for an hour, perhaps an hour and a half, before admitting in a tone that was more bewildered than frightening that for the first time in his life he was lost. They could still hear the dim thunder of water in the drains, but the acoustics of all of these tunnels was so crazed that it was impossible to tell if the water sounds were coming from ahead or behind, left or right, above or below. Their matches were gone. They were lost in the dark. Bill was scared, plenty scared. The conversation he'd had with his father in his father's shop kept coming back to him. There's 9 pounds of blueprints that just disappeared somewhere along the line. My point is that nobody knows where all the damn sewers and drains go, or when they worked. Nobody cares when they don't. There's 3 or 4 sad sucks from Dairy Water who have to try and find out which pump went fluey or where the plugged up is. It's dark and smelly, and there were rats. Those are all good reasons to stay out, but the best reason is that you could get lost. It's happened before. It's happened. Sure it had. There was that bundle of bones and polished cotton they had passed on the way to its lair. For instance, Bill felt panic trying to rise and pushed it back. It went, but not easily. He could feel it back there, a live thing, struggling and twisting, trying to get out, adding to it. It was the nagging, unswearable question of whenever they had killed it or not. Richie said yes, Mike said yes, so did Eddie. But he hadn't liked the frightened and doubtful look on Bev's face or on Stan's. As the light died and they crawled back through the small door, away from the struttering, collapsing web. "So what do we do?" Stan asked. Bill heard the frightened little boy trembled in Stan's voice and knew the question was aimed directly at him. "Yeah," Ben said. "What? Damn, I wish we had a flashlight or even a candle." Bill thought he heard a sniffled snob in a second, eclipsing it. It frightened him more than anything else. Ben would have been outstanding to know it, but Bill thought the fat boy tough and resourceful, steadier than Richie, and less adept to cave in suddenly than Stan. If Ben was getting ready to crack, they were on the edge of very bad trouble. It was not the skeleton of the water department guy to which Bill's own mind kept returning, but to Tom Swanner and Becky Trasher, lost in McDouglas's cave. He would push the thought away, and then it would come stealing back. Something else was troubling him, but the concept was too large and too vague for his tired boy's mind to grasp. Perhaps it was the very sympathic of the idea that made it inclusive. They were falling away from each other. The bond that had held them all this long summer was dissolving. It had been faced and vanquished. It might be dead, as Richie and Eddie thought, or it might be wounded so badly it would sleep for 100 years, or thousands, or 10,000. And they had faced it, seen it, with its final mask laid aside, and it had been horrible enough, oh for sure, but once seen, its physical form was not so bad, and its most potent weapon it was taken away from it. They had all had, after all, seen spiders before they were alien and somehow crawling and dreadful, and he supposed that none of them would ever be able to see another one. If we ever get out of this without feeling a stutter of revolution, but a spider was after all only a spider. Perhaps at the end, when the masks of horror were laid aside, there was nothing with which the human mind could not cope. There was a heartening thought, anything except the deadlights, whenever had been out there, but perhaps even that unspeakable living light which crouched at the doorway to the microverse was dead or dying. The deadlights and the trip into the black, to the place where they had been, was already growing hazy and hard to recall in his mind. And that wasn't really the point. The point felt, but not grasped, was simply that the fellowship was ending. It was ending, and they were still in the dark. That other had, though their friendship perhaps been able to make them something more than children, but they were becoming children again. Bill felt it as much as the others. What now, Bill? Richie asked, finally saying it right now. I don't know, Bill said. His stutter was back, alive and well. He heard it. They heard it, and he stood in the dark, smelling the sodden aroma of their growing panic, wondering how long it would be for somebody. Stan, most likely it would be Stan, tore things wide open by saying, "Well, why don't you know? You got us into this." "And what about Henry?" Mike asked uneasily. "Is he still out there, or what?" "Oh, geez," Eddie said, almost moaned. "I forgot about him. Sure he is. He's probably as lost as we are, and we could run into him any time." "Geez, Bill, don't you have any idea? Your dad works down there. Don't you have any idea at all?" Bill listened to the distant, mocking thunder of the water, and tried to have the idea that Eddie, all of them, had a right to demand, because yes, correct, he had gotten them into this, and it was his responsibility to get them back out. Nothing came nothing. "I have an idea," Beverly said quietly. In the dark, Bill heard a sound. He could not immediately place a whispering little sound, but not scary. Then there was a more easily placed sound, a zipper. What? He thought, and then he realized what. She was undressing. For some reason, Beverly was undressing. "What are you doing?" Richie asked, and his shocked voice crackled on the last word. "I know something," Beverly said in the dark, and to Bill her voice sounded older. "I know because my father told me. I know how to bring us back together, and if we're not together, we'll never get out." "What?" Ben asked, sounding bewildered and terrified. "What are you talking about?" "Something that will bring us together to forever. Something that will show." "No," Beverly, Bill said, suddenly understanding everything. "That will show that I love you all," Beverly said, "that you're all my friends." "What's she Mike began, calmly. Beverly cut across his words. "Who's first?" she asked. "I think 8. In the Lair of It, 1985. "I think he's dying," Beverly went. His arm. It ate his arm. She reached for Bill, clung to him, and Bill shook her off. "It's getting away again," he roared at her. Blood caked his lips and chin. "Come on, Richie. Ben, this time we're going to finish her." Richie turned Bill towards him, looked at him as you would look at a man who is hopeless raven. Bill, we have to take care of Eddie. We have to get a tortigrant on him. Get him out of here. But Beverly was now sitting with Eddie's head in her lap, cradling him. She had closed his eyes. Go with Bill, she said. If you let him die for nothing, if it comes back in another 25 years, or 50, or even 2,000, I swear I'll haunt your ghosts. Go! Richie looked at her for a moment, indecisive. Then he became aware that her face was losing definition, becoming not a face, but a pale shape. In the growing shadows, the light was faded and deciding him. All right, he said to Bill. This time we chased. Ben was standing in back of the spider web, which had begun to decay again. He had also seen the shape swaying high up in it, and he prayed that Bill would not look up. But as the web began to fall in drifts of strands and streaks, Bill did. He saw Audrey sagging as if in a very old and creaking elevator. She dropped 10 feet, stopped swaying from side to side, and then absolutely dropped another 15. Her face never changed. Her eyes, china blue, were wide open. Her bare feet swung back and forth like pendulums. Her hair hung linkly over her shoulder. Her mouth was ajar. Audra! He screamed. Bill, come on, Ben shouted. The web was falling all around them now, falling to the floor and beginning to run. Richie suddenly grabbed Bill around the waist and propelled him forward, shooting for a 10-foot high gap between the floor and the bottomless cross stand of the saggy web. Go, Bill. Go, go. That's Audrey, Bill shouted desperately. That's Audra. I don't give a shit if it's the Pope, Richie said grimly. Eddie's dead, and we're going to kill it. If it's still alive, we're going to finish the job this time, Big Bill. Either she's alive or she's not. Now come on. Bill hung back a moment longer, and then snapshots of the children, all the dead children, seemed to flutter through his mind like his lost photographs from Georgie's album. School friends. All right, let's go. God forgive me. Bill and Richie ran under the strands of cross webbing seconds before it collapsed and joined Ben on the other side. They ran after it as Audrey swung and dangled 50 feet above the stone and wrapped in a numbling cocoon that was attached to the decaying web. 9. Ben. They followed the trail of its black blood, oily pools of ichor that ran and dripped into the cracks between the flagstones. But as the floor began to rise for a circular black opening at the far side of the chamber, Ben saw something new, a trail of eggs. Each was black and rough, smelled perhaps as big as an ostrich egg. A waxy light shone from within them. Ben realized they were sympathetic. He could see black shapes moving inside. Its children, he thought, and felt his gorge rise. Its miscarried children. God. Richie and Bill had stopped and were staring at the eggs with stupid, dazed wonder. Go on, Ben shouted. I'll take care of them. Get it. Here, Richie shouted and threw Ben a pack of Dairytown house matches. Ben caught them. Bill and Richie ran on. Ben watched them in the rapidly dimming light. For a moment, they ran into the darkness of its escape passage and were lost from sight. Then he looked down at the first of the thin-shelled eggs, at the black manna-like shadow inside. It felt his determination waver. Hey guys, this was too much. This was simply too awful. And surely they would die without his help. They had not been so much late as dropped, but its time was closed. And if one of them is capable of surviving, even one, summoning all of his courage, summoning up Eddie's pale, dying face, Ben brought one desert driver, boot down on the first egg. It broke with a sodden squelch as some stinking polishment ran out around his boots. Then a spider, the size of a rat, was scrambling weakly across the floor, trying to get away. And Ben could hear it in his head. Its high, mewling cries, like the sound of a handsaw, being bent rapidly back and forth, so that it makes ghost music. Ben lurched after it on legs that felt like slits, and brought his foot down again. He felt the spider's body church and splatter under the heel of his boot. his gorge clenched, and this time there was no way he could hold back. He vomited, then twisted his heels, grinding the fang into the stones, listening to the cries in his head fade to nothing. How many eggs did it? I read somewhere that spiders can lay thousands or millions. I can't keep doing this. I'll go mad. You have to. You have to. Come on, Ben. Get it together. He went to the next egg and repeated the process in the last of the dying light. Everything was repeated. The brittle snap, the squelch of liquid, the final coup de grace. The next, making his way slowly towards the black arch into which his friends had gone. The darkness was complete now, Beverly in decay and Webb somewhere behind him. He could still hear the whisper of his collapse. The eggs were pallid stones in the dark. As he reached each one, he struck a light from the matchbook and broke it open. In each case, he was able to follow the course of the dazed spiderling and crushed it before the light flickered out. He had no idea how he was going to proceed. If his match gave out before he had crushed the last of the eggs and killed each one's unspeakable cargo. 10. It, 1985. Still coming. It sensed them still coming, gaining. Its fears grew. Perhaps it was not internal after all. The unthinkable must finally be fought. Worse, it sensed the death of its young. A third of these hateful men boys was walking suddenly up its trail. It's of birth, almost insane with revolution, but continuing, nonetheless, medically stamping the life from each of its eggs. No, it wailed, lurching from side to side, feeling its life force running from 100 wounds, none of them mortal in itself, but each a song of pain, each slowing it. One of its legs hung by a single living twist of meat. One of its eyes was blind. It sensed a terrible rupture inside the results of whatever poison one of its the hated men boys had managed to shoot down its throat, and still they came on, closing the distance. And how could this happen? It whined and meowed, and when it sensed them almost directly behind, it did the only thing it could do now. It turned to fight. 11. Beverly. Before the last of the light faded and the dark closed down, she saw Bill's wife plunge another 20 feet and then fetched up again. She had begun to spin her long red hair, fanning out. His wife, she fought, but I was his first love, and if he fought some other woman was his first, it was only because he forgot Derry. Then she was in darkness, alone with the sound of the fallen web, and Eddie's simple, moveless weight. She didn't want to let him go. Didn't want to let his face lie on the foul floor of this place. So she held his head in the crook of an arm that had gone mostly numb and brushed his hair away from his damp forehead. She thought of the birds. That was something she supposed she had gotten from Stan, poor Stan, who hadn't been able to face this. All of them. I was their first love. She tried to remember it. It was something good to think about in all this darkness, where you couldn't place the sounds. It made her feel less alone. At first, it wouldn't come. The image of the birds, inverted crows and graggles and starlings, spring birds that came back from somewhere, while the streets were still running with melted water, and the last patches of crusted dirty snow clung grimly to their shady places. It seemed to her that it was always on a cloudy day that you first heard and saw those spring birds, and wondered where they came from. Suddenly, they were just back in Derry, filling the white air with their raucous chatter. They lined the telephone wires and roof peaks of the Vicarin houses on West Broadway. They jostled for places on the aluminum branches of the Alabrunt TV, automaton on the top of Wally's Spa. They loaded the wet black branches of the elms on Lower Main Street. They settled, they walked to each other in the screaming, babbling voices of old country women, and at that weekly Grange bingo games, and they at some single which humans could not discern. They all took wing at once, turning the sky black with their numbers, and came down somewhere else. Yes, the birds. I was thinking of them because I was ashamed. It was my father who made me ashamed. I guess, and maybe that was its doing too. Maybe. The memory came, the memory behind the birds, but it was vague and disconnected. Perhaps this one always would be. Her thoughts broke off as she realized that Eddie. 12. Love and Desire. August 10th, 1958. Eddie comes to her first because he is the most frightening. He comes to her not as her friend of that summer or as her brief lover now, but the way he would have come to his mother only 3 or 4 years ago to be comforted. He doesn't draw back from her smooth nakedness, and at first she doubts if he even feels it. He is trembling, and although she holds him, the darkness is so perfect that even this close she cannot see him. Except for the rough cast, he might as well be a phantom. What do you want? He asked her. You have to put your thing in me, she says. He tries to pull back, but she holds him, and he subsides against her. She has heard someone, Ben, she thinks, drawn in his breath. Bevy, I can't do this. I don't know how. I think it's easy, but you'll have to get undressed. She thinks about the intrinsics of managing cast and shirt, first somehow separated, and then rejoining them, and amends your pants anyway. No, I can't. But she thinks part of him can, and wants to, because his trembling has stopped, and she feels something small and hard which presses against the right side of her belly. You can, she says, and pulls him down the surface beneath her bare back and legs, his firm clay and dry. The distant thunder of the water is drowsy, smoothing. She reaches for him. There's a moment when her father's face interviews, harsh and forbidding. I went to see if you're intact. And then she closes her arms around Eddie's neck, her smooth cheek against his smooth cheek, and as he tenderly touches her small breasts, she sighs and thinks for the first time, this is Eddie, and she remembers a day in July. Could it only have been last month when no one else turned up in the Berriens but Eddie, and he had a whole bunch of little Lulu comics books, and they read together for most of the afternoon. Lil Lulu looking for bewildered berries and getting in all sorts of crazy situations. Which Hazel, all of those guys. It had been fun. She thinks of birds in particular, of the grackles and starlings and crows that come back in the spring, and her hands go to his belt and loosen it. And he says again that he can't do that. She tells him that he can't. She knows he can't. And what she feels it is not a shame. It's not shame or fear now, but a kind of trumpeting where he says, and that bird thing pushes urgently against her inner thigh. Here, she says, Beverly, I'll fall you on you, he says, and she hears his breath start to whistle painfully. I think that's sort of the idea, she tells him, and holds him gently and guides him. He pushes forward too fast, and there's pain. She draws her breath in, her teeth biting on her lower lip, and thinks of the birds again, the spring birds lining the roof pecks of houses, taking wing all at once under low March clouds. Beverly, he says uncertainly, are you okay? Go slower, she says. It'll be easier for you to breathe. He does move more slowly, and after a while, his breathing speeds up, but she understands this is not because there is anything wrong with him. The pain fades suddenly. He moves more quickly, then stops sniffing and makes a sound. Some sound. She senses that this is something for him. Something extraordinary special. Something like flying. She feels powerful. She feels a sense of trumpeting rise up strongly within her. Is this what her father was afraid of? Well, he might be. There was power in this act, all right. A chain-breaking power that was blood deep. She feels no physical pleasure, but there is a kind of mental ecstasy in it for her. She senses the closeness. He puts his face against her neck, and she holds him. He's crying. She holds him and feels the part of him that made a connection between them begin to fade. It is not leaving her exactly. It is simply fading, becoming less. When his weight shifts away, she sits up and touches his face in the darkness. Did you? Did I what? Whenever it is, I don't know exactly. He shakes his head. She feels it with her hand against his cheek. I don't think it was exactly like like the big boys say, but it was. It was really something. He speaks low, so the others can't hear. I love you, Bevy. Her conscience breaks down a little there. She's quite sure there's more talk, some whisper, some loud, and can't remember was what is said. It doesn't matter. Does she have to talk each of them into it all over again? Yes, probably, but it doesn't matter. They have to be talked into it. This essential human link between the world and the infinite, the only place where the bloodstream touches eternity. It doesn't matter. What matters is love and desire. Here in this dark is as good a place as any, better than some maybe. Mike comes to her, then Richie, and the act is repeated. Now she feels some pleasure, dim heat in her childish, unmajored sex, and she closes her eyes as Stan comes to her, and she thinks of the bird, spring, and the birds, and she sees them again and again, all lightning at once, filling up the winter naked trees. Shockwave, riders on the moving edge of nature's most violent season. She sees them make wing again and again, the flutter of their wings like the snap of many sheets on the line, and she thinks a month from now every kind in Dairy Park will have a kite. They'll run to keep the strings from getting tangled with each other. She thinks again, this is what flying is like. With Stan, as with the others, there is that restful sense of faded, of leaving with whatever they truly need from this act. Some ultimate close that as yet unfound. Did you? She asks again, and although she doesn't know exactly what it is, she knows that he hasn't. There is a long wait, and then Ben comes to her. He is trembling all over, but it is not too fearful trembling she felt in Stan. Beverly, I can't, he says in a tone which purports to be reasonable and is anything but. You can, too. I can feel it. She sure can. There's more of this hardness, more of him. She can feel it below the gentle push of his belly. Its size raises a certain curiosity, and she touches the blood lightning. He groans against her neck, and she blows of his breath, causing her bare body to dimple with goosebumps. She feels the first twist of real heat race through her. Suddenly the feeling in her is very large. She recognizes that it is too big. And is he too big? Can she take that into herself? And too old for her? Some feeling that walks in boots. This is like Henry's M80s. Something not meant for kids. Something that could explode and blow you up. But this was not the place or time for worry here. There was love, desire, and the dark. If they didn't try for the first two, they would surely, he felt, with the last. Beverly, don't. Yes, I. Show me how to fly, she says with a calmness voice she doesn't feel, aware by the fresh, wet warmth on her cheek and neck that he has begun to cry. Show me, Ben. No. If you wrote the poem, show me. Feel my hair if you want to. Ben, it's all right. Beverly, he's not just trembling now. He's shaking all over, but she senses again that this ague is not all fear. Part of it is the prescription of the throne. This act is all about, she thinks of. The birds. His face, his dear, sweet, earnest face, and knows it. It is not fear. It is wanton he feels. A deep, passionate wanton now barely held in check. And she feels that sense of power again, something like flying, something like looking down from above and seeing all the birds on the roof peaks, on the TV antenna atop, Wally's, seeing streets spread out map-like. Oh, desire, Right, this was something. It was love and desire that taught you to fly. Ben, yes, she cries suddenly, and the leash breaks. She feels pain again for a moment. There is the frightening sensation of being crushed. Then he props himself up on the palms of his hands, and that feeling is gone. He's big. Oh, yes, the pain is back, and it's much deeper than when Eddie first entered her. She has to bite her lips again and think of the birds until the burning is gone. But it does go, and she is able to reach up and touch his lip with one finger, and he moans. The heat is back, and she feels her power suddenly shift to him. She gives it gladly and goes with it. There is a sensation first of being rocked, of a delicious spreading sweetness, which makes her begin to turn her head helplessly from side to side, and a tuneless humming comes from between her closed lips. This is a flying. This, oh love, oh desire, oh this is something impossible to deny. Binding, given, making a strong circle, binding, given, flying. Oh Ben, oh my dear, yes, she whispers, feeling the sweat stand out on her face, feeling their connection, something firmly in place, something like eternity, the number 8 rocked over on its side. I love you so much, dear, and she feels the thing begin to happen, something of which the girls, who whisper and giggle about sex in the girls' room, have no idea, at least as far as she knows. They only marveled at how gushy sex must be, and now she realized that for many of them, sex must be some unrealized, undefined monster. They refer to the act as it. Would you do it? Do it? Do your sister and her boyfriend do it? Do your mom and dad still do it? And how they never intend to do it? Oh, yes, you would think that the whole girls' side of the 5th grade class was made up on the splinter to be, and it is obvious to Beverly that none of them can suspect this conclusion, and she is only kept from screaming by her knowledge that the others will hear and think her badly hurt. She puts the side of her hand in her mouth and bites down hard. She understands the screaming laughter of Greta Bowie and Sally Mullerin and all the others better now, hadn't they? The 7 of them spent most of this, the longest, scariest summer of their lives, laughing like loons. You laugh because that's fearful and unknown is also what's funny. You laugh the way a small child will laugh sometimes and cry at the same time. When a caperine circus clown approaches, knowing it is supposed to be funny, but is also unknown, full of the unknown's internal power, biting her hand will not stay the cry, and she can only reassure them and Ben by crying out her afterment in the darkness. Yes, less glorious images of flight fill her head, mixing with the harsh calling of the grackles and startlings. Free sounds became the world's sweetest music. So she flies up, and now the power is not with her or with him, but somewhere between them. And he cries out, and she can feel his arm trembling, and she arches up and into him, feeling his spans, his touch, his total fleeting and mercenary with her in the dark. They break through into the light together. Then it is over, and they are in each other's arms. And when he tries to say something, perhaps some stupid apology that would hurt what she remembers, some stupid apology like a handcuff, she stops his words with a kiss and sends him away. Bills comes to her. He tries to say something, but his stutter is almost total now. You be quiet, she says, secured in her new knowledge, but aware that she is tired now. Tired and damn sore. The insides and backs of her thighs feel sticky, and she thinks it's maybe because Ben actually finished, or maybe because she is bleeding. Everything is going to be totally okay. Are you sure? Yes, she says, and links her hands behind his neck, feeling the sweaty mat of his hair. You just bet. It is not as it was with Ben. There was his passion, but not the same kind. Being with Bill is the best conclusion to this that there could be. He is kind, tender, just short of calm. She senses eagerness, but it is tempered and held back by his anxiety for her, perhaps because only Bill and she herself realize what an enormous act this is, and how it must never be spoken of, not to anyone else, not even to each other. At the end, she is surprised by that sudden upsurge, and she has time to think, "Oh, it's going to happen again. I don't know if I can stand it." But her thoughts are swept away by the utter sweetness of it, and she barely hears him whispering, "I love you, Bev. I love you. I'll always love you," saying it over and over and not stutter it at all. She hugs him to her, and for a moment they stayed that way, his smooth cheek against hers. He withdraws from her without saying anything, and for a little while she's alone, pulling her clothes back together, slowly putting them on, aware of a dull throbbing pain of which they begin being male. We'll never know, aware also of a certain exhausting pleasure, and the real life of having it over. There is an emphasis down there now, and all that she is glad that her sex is her own again. The emphasis imparts a strange melancholy which she could never express, except to think of bare trees under a white winter sky, empty trees waiting for blackbirds to come like ministers at the end of March to preside over the death of snow. She finds them by groping for their hands. For a moment no one speaks, and when someone does, it does not surprise her much that it's Eddie. I think when we went right to turns we should have gone left. Geez, I knew that, but I was so sweaty and frigged up. Be frigged up your whole life, adds Richie says. His voice is pleasant. The raw edge of panic is completely gone. We went wrong. Some other places too, Eddie says, ignoring him. But that's the worst one. If we can find our way back here, we just might be okay. They formed up in a clumsy line. Eddie first, Beverly second now, her hand on Eddie's shoulder. As Mike's is on hers, they begin to move again, faster. This time, Eddie displays none of his former nervous care. We're going home, she thinks, and shivers with relief and joy. Home, yes, and that will be good. We've done our jobs, what we came for. Now we can go back to just being kids again, and that will be good too. As they moved through the dark, she realized the sound of running water is closer. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.